Hi, and welcome back to my channel. This video will be my January wrap up. I am wearing one of my favorite shirts. When in doubt, go to the library, obviously. I didn't film a December wrap up. I did a lot of reading vlogs. I did a lot of other different videos. So this will be resuming my wrap up videos. So the first book I read this month, Six Crimson Cranes. I really enjoyed this book. I didn't know what to expect, but I have heard really good things about it. So I didn't set expectations, so it didn't disappoint me. It didn't exceed my expectations. I didn't set any. I will say that Shiori read a lot younger than she actually is. She read almost as like an advanced middle school age person, but the one that showed maturity throughout the story. And that's one thing I love that Elizabeth Lim did with this book. When you first meet Shiori, she's a really engaging, appealing character. She's someone you already love. And yet, Elizabeth Lim takes Shiori at the beginning of the book and really dramatically grows her character. And you wouldn't think at the beginning of the book that she really had a tremendous amount of room to grow, and yet she does in a very believable way. I really enjoy the twists and turns and the different characters added to this story. I am so glad that we're gonna get a sequel to this book. It's definitely gonna be one that I pick up right away. I think that the writing was beautiful. It definitely felt fairy tale-esque, which this is. It's a fairy tale retelling. And I think that what Elizabeth Lim did here was absolutely beautiful. So the first audiobook I read this month is Lore. Now, I knew going into this that people had mixed reactions, mixed reviews to this book. It was really well loved at the beginning of last year before I had discovered BookTube. And the reason that I'm reading it, obviously, is it was on the Goodreads Choice Awards list. When I started the audiobook, immediately the very first scene is so gratuitously graphic. I'm like, whoa, this is gonna be a lot darker than I thought it would be. Now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get into it. Okay, good. This POV for the prologue is not the POV that we're gonna get throughout the book. Maybe I can stomach it. Now, the gratuitous violence and gore and bloody, it came in waves, but it never really went away, and it wasn't necessary. I also really struggled at the beginning because Alexandra Braken did a terrible job establishing what age Lore is. It wasn't until, I don't know, the last quarter of the book that we finally get to put a number on her age. She's 17. I figured she was around 17, 18 because this is marketed as young adult. The entire book, it read like she was mid-20s. And when you're thinking back to all of the memories, the 7 years before or etc. that Alexandra Braken puts in here, if she's that young, you can't go that far back. You can't have all of this tremendous life experience. And the bond between her and Castor, it developed when they were children. They hadn't seen each other since they were 10 years old. You are a completely different person between when you're 10 and when you're 17. So that, I did not believe it. There's a lot with this book, and I love Greek myth retellings. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a fantastic way to bring it into the modern age. But this whole Agon thing that Braken created, I didn't find it believable. I didn't like it. It wasn't well done at all. And the way it ended, talk about the quintessential deus ex machina, to use a phrase that originated with Greek plays. No, this did not do it for me. There were some things that I thought were decently written. Thus, I'm going to give this book 2 stars and not 1 star. But as far as a good book, no. And it's so sad that There's so many gorgeous special editions for this book because it does not deserve it.
Hi, so I am filming this portion of the wrap up from my editing location because I realized, as while editing the video, that I forgot to wrap up one of the books. This book is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I read this book because it was on the long list for the Goodreads Choice Award for Young Adult Fantasy, and I enjoyed it. I thought that Stephanie Garber created whimsy without making the characters too fluffy. I thought it felt very much like a fairy tale. I almost want to say Disney princess vibes, but not quite. It's that fairy tale ideal that everybody wants. But the characters have very real consequences for their actions. And I love the opening scene where, and I've already blanked on the character names. I'm really not good at remembering character names. That does not mean anything about the book, because I think I ended up rating this somewhere around 4 stars. So the main character is where she mates the Prince of Hearts, who is a fate, almost like a god of sorts. The scenario that she meets him in is so absurd. And she totally, I really think, even though he would never admit it, I think she blew his mind with what she did. I think he's fixated on her and like, I need to get my one up on her so she can't control me. I really enjoyed it as it went along, and how he's giving her these trials and these tests of things that she has to do. She has to pay the consequence. Like, she's thinking of the long-term effects of these different things that she has to do. Like she gets the prince, the actual prince, not the fate guy, not the Prince of Hearts, like the Jacks. Anyway, see, I told you I'm bad with names. But anyway, she gets the prince of this kingdom. She wins him, but she doesn't feel like it's right, and she wants to undo it, and like there's all these problems. So it was really adorable and I enjoyed it.
So the next book that I read this month, Case of Beasts. So this book is another one of those art books. I call them like the how-to, the making of, the behind the scenes. It's just, there's a lot of art and artistry in these types of books. I have that whole shelf that was behind my Christmas tree. This is gorgeous. I absolutely love it, and I loved it from the first moment. So first off, this flap right here, it's magnetic, so it's like an actual case. Then you open it up, and it's Obscurus Books, where Newt Scamander actually publishes Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. So that's fantastic. Then as you go through, there's a lot more text than I expected, but I still read this in an afternoon. But there's actual pieces that you can pull out. This I love. This is Tina's identification card, basically. There's like lenticular, all sorts of stuff. And there's full-size pullouts. So let's see, this one is a map of the United States. There's also one in here that's wanted posters for Tina and Newt. So cool. I absolutely love this. Okay, so the next book I finished in January is Clap When You Land. This is a reread for me. This was a reread for me. It's one of the first rereads I've done for a while. I can't remember the last time I reread something. And in Clap When You Land, it's Elizabeth Acevedo's second novel. And just like the Poet X, Clap When You Land is written in verse. Clap When You Land has 2 narrators. It has Yahira in New York City and Camino in the Dominican Republic. Both of them share a father, but until a tragic accident, neither of them know that they share a father. Neither of them know that they are sisters. And yet, by the end of it, you see that nearly every adult, actually every adult in their family, knows about them and knows about what their father did. Their father traveled every summer back to the Dominican Republic to spend the summer with Camino. And then he would spend the remaining 9 months back in New York. Yahira in New York always thought that her dad was traveling for business, and Camino thought he was just off working to make the money that they needed to survive in the Dominican Republic. And on the day that he's supposed to travel to the Dominican Republic for the summer before both girls' senior year, they're only 2 months apart, the plane crashes. And so the novel unfolds over the next, I think, about 50 or so days, and it brings these two girls together. The way that Elizabeth Acevedo writes, it packs a punch with every single page. The way she crafts words, there's just something about the way that she crafts words. She shapes the thoughts, and you see the images, you feel the shapes. It's a tactile experience, even when you're reading it or listening to it, as I did this time. And when I listened to it, so the audiobook, because it's dual perspective, has Elizabeth Acevedo, who narrates, I believe, Yahira, and another narrator who narrates Camino. Both of them do an amazing job. But Elizabeth Acevedo, these are her words. She was a spoken word poet first. And the way that she weaves these together, she's also Dominican. It tells this story in a way that I don't think anyone else could. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Next, in the month of January, I finished Realmbreaker. This took me a long time to read. It's a big book, and it tries way too hard. I mentioned in my first reading vlog of the year, the first impression that I got from this was that she's trying too hard. I actually went back and looked at my review of Red Queen, which is the other book that I've read by her, and it seems like her focus on building a world is common for her writing, because I mentioned something in my review of Red Queen that talked about all the effort that she put in to building the world, and it didn't really pay off. And I feel the same way about this one. I didn't hate this book. So one of the things that frustrated me throughout is her naming conventions. I get that if we're in a completely new world, we're gonna have some different sounding names. The problem with the names that Aveyard devises is that they do not follow typical English spelling conventions. The names in here seem like she reached into a Scrabble bag and threw stuff out. It's really frustrating, and I could get through, and she had enough nicknames on there. One of the characters, Dom, I have no idea how to pronounce his full name. So clearly she's gonna give him a nickname, Dom, so that we can pronounce it, so that we can imagine his name in our head. But I know that people with reading difficulties, let's say they have dyslexia, when you use non-typical spelling conventions, you're gonna throw them off. This is something that I picked up on more, I think, because I took a class last semester on linguistics geared for teachers who want to be teachers of students who are learning English. They would also be thrown off by this. Then there's the fact that in this book, she does not spend nearly enough time in any single one of the characters' heads for the reader to gain any sort of empathy or connection with these readers. Every single chapter goes to another person, another perspective. And then another problem on top of that, the only differentiation I saw she doesn't use first person in these perspectives, she uses third person, which is doable. But the only differences in these perspectives you get when you are going from the queen to any of the members of the troop that's traveling. That really bothered me, because so many times I had to flip back to the beginning of the chapter to see whose perspective we were supposed to be reading from. And then the overall problem that they're trying to solve doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Also, the ancient witch that just happens to travel along, I don't get the necessity of her character or any bit of that. I didn't hate this book. I wouldn't say it was a terrible read. It took far too long to read. There's 563 pages of blah. I've started using the Compile rating system. According to that, I rated this book a 2.5. So on Goodreads, I'll give it a 2. On Storygraph, I'll give it a 2.5. So not a great book. The next book that I want to talk about is How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. I have a lot of thoughts about this book. Right now, in 2022, it's my favorite book. Now, granted, we're just going into the 3rd full week of 2022, but I have a feeling that this book might stay on the top 10 until the end of the year. I had never heard of this book prior to seeing it on my Libro FM. I read a little bit about it, read a little bit of the blurbs, and decided, hey, I'm going to use my free credit on it. I am so grateful that I did. This is a surprise read for me, but it fits so well with my reading tastes. I am a historian, but I'm also an avid consumer of literature, BookTube channel. And the way that Clint Smith combines the two is magnificent. He's a poet, and I could hear that in how the narrative flowed throughout the text, even before he mentioned writing and revising his work on poetry. I've looked up author bios since reading this, and it does mention his work on poetry, which is award-winning, and that he's a writer for Atlantic Monthly. So he's not a historian by trade, but he is a storyteller. The parts of history that fascinate me the most is not knowing all the facts, not knowing all the nitty-gritty. I love analyzing how people tell the story, because how you tell the story is so crucial. Throughout this book, Clint Smith looks at 6 different places. He does mention in the author's note that he went to a few more, but wasn't able to include them. The 6 places that he goes to are Monticello, the Whitney Plantation, formerly Angola Plantation, Angola Prison. He goes to a cemetery that I'm blanking on the name of right now, and he goes to New York City and Senegal. At each of those places, he looks at the historiography, the telling of history, the writing of history, and how they do it. So one of the most profound for me was the one at the cemetery, and I wish I remembered the name of it. So this particular cemetery is a cemetery full of the remains of Confederate soldiers, and it is run by the Daughters of the Confederacy. When he went to visit and he's listening to the tour guide talks about how these women, just after the Civil War, wanted to bring back the bodies and give them remembrance and honor them, because many of them, because the Confederacy didn't have the money, were just buried where they lay. And I was struck by the fact that every human being has value. I think that it is a good thing to bring honor to these lives after they've been passed, give them the respect. But at the same time, it's really complicated because of what the Confederacy stood for, and how that cemetery and those things there have been used and now make up part of symbology for some not so great things. It was on the site of a former, I believe, Anglican church. The Daughters of the Confederacy, this is in the 1870s, I believe, they actually went to the Tiffany Company and commissioned stained glass windows. And so there are stained glass windows representing each of the states of the Confederacy that are magnificent. They are very well artistically designed, created, implemented. But they have a very complex representation and things that you have to battle with. Clint Smith also at this cemetery there was a memorial, a celebration. I think it was Memorial Day. The Sons of Confederate Veterans, I believe, put on a ceremony or a celebration or something on Memorial Day, and he actually went back there. Now, he didn't go by himself. Now, Clint Smith is a black man. He went with a friend, but he went and he talked to people there. He masterfully asked these questions without putting judgment behind them. So these people are sharing their honest and true thoughts. and it's just so profound. I have ordered a physical copy of the book. It has not arrived yet. I will reread this book this year. This might be the first time that I've read a book twice in 1 year, but I plan to reread it and annotate it and fully study it. I may even do a full length video on this book because I have so many thoughts about it. I think everyone needs to read this book. So the next book I read is A Heart So Fierce and Broken. I had heard some mixed things going into this, including my own review of the first book, A Curse So Dark and Lonely. It's been a couple years since I read A Curse So Dark and Lonely. I did go on Goodreads, read through a few of the reviews to refresh my memory, to put me back into this world. I read about 50 pages the first night. And then the next morning I woke up, it was snowy outside. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'm not gonna go back to bed. So I picked up the book and I finished it. I didn't mind the fact that those other things had been added to A Curse So Dark and Lonely because it had been so long and it was so disconnected. It felt like a brand new story for me. And honestly, I prefer Gray as the male protagonist. I absolutely love Liamara. I think she's a fantastic addition to the story. I will say the one thing that bothered me was the fact that all of the frankly terrible actions that Ren took in this story, it just made me think we're supposed to root for him as the love interest for Harper in the first book. Harper seems really naive and trusting at this point. Now the epilogue did help explain some of the actions that Ren was taking and why he might have taken them. One thing that I loved was the fact that all the trauma that Ren and Gray experienced while they were under Lilith's curse, Brigid Kemmerer did not dismiss that. Clearly, both men suffer from that trauma and it's exhibited in different ways. So I think that Brigid Kemmerer did a really good job with that, with not dismissing it, with validating it as a real experience. Overall, I enjoyed this. I would not rate it 5 stars. But when I did the call pile, it helped me solidify 4 on Goodreads, 4.5 on Storygraph. This month I also read the updated edition of Film Wizardry of Harry Potter. This book was published in 2010, so I don't know what was updated about it. I have a penchant for these types of art books. I've realized that I say absolutely love a lot. I find myself fascinated by the behind the scenes, by seeing the artwork, by seeing the artistic creativity that goes into creating all of the things that we end up seeing on screen. But this book is probably one of the lower ranking of these that I've read. And I've read quite a few. I've read ones for plays. I've read ones for like 2 for each of the Hobbit movies. But this one, I liked it. I enjoyed it. Now, part of it might be because I've read a lot about Harry Potter. I have the magnificent page to screen. So a lot of this was probably talked about in there. One thing I don't like, and I'm not going to open it because it's not going to come across on camera, is that the text print is very small. So it's not as enjoyable to read with the text that small. I think there was too much text for this. I did enjoy the paper replicas that they had in there, and it even included stickers. So all of the art books that I've read so far and that are in my collection are 5 stars. This one's actually a 4-star. The next book I read, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. This took me longer to read than I expected, and that's because this is not a traditional cookbook. Most cookbooks you get, there'll be a little bit of prose, a little bit of storytelling that goes into it, but for the most part, you'll use like an index or a table of contents or something to flip to the recipes that you want. This book does not do that. I picked up this book, as I described in my vlog, because, well, for 2 reasons. One, I had seen the author, Samin Nosrat, on Michael Pollan's Netflix show and then on her own Netflix show. And then the other reason is because my cousin is a very talented artist and writer. And then her brother and his wife both have degrees in culinary arts. And so she had picked up this book on which Samin Nosrat's Netflix show is based, and had given it to them for, I think, Christmas. And I took one look at it and absolutely fell in love with it. And by that time, I'd already seen Samin Nosrat. So obviously I put this on my wish list. The illustrations by Wendy McNaughton, stellar part of this book. Now, the first half of this book is text. It's not recipes, but it's not like traditional text. It's Nosrat's lessons in using these 4 different aspects of cooking to really build up your expertise, your diet, your blanking on the word that I want. Now, I knew when getting this book that I have no intention of ever making any of the recipes, and that's what's in the second half, because honestly, I don't have the time. A lot of people say they don't have the time, but you could make time for it. I'm not interested in it, so this isn't really something I'm going to make time for either. So we've got salt, fat, acid, heat, but I really enjoyed reading it because you can hear her voice coming through the text. She just has such a winning personality. She's always smiling. So I enjoyed it. Next I have Vow So Bold and Deadly by Brigid Kemmerer. This is the finale in the A Curse So Dark and Lonely series, although I did see little things that she sprinkled in right at the end that leave the door open for her returning to this world later if she so chose to. I mentioned in my reading vlog for this that I have mixed thoughts about this. I still really enjoy this book. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy the world. I think she really did a good job in redeeming Ren's character and having him actually have to account for the choices that he made. I just think that she wrote herself into a corner in extending this book into a series. Not this book, but the first book. She could have wrapped it up. It could have been a standalone. And I remember thinking the whole time, how is she going to wrap this up? How is she going to do this satisfactorily? She sort of wrapped it up, and that's what kind of left me going, okay, fine. I still really enjoyed it. It would be a 5-star must-have for me if she had been able to figure out a better answer for the problem that she threw in at the end of the first book.
So I realized as I recorded some wrap-ups for some awesome books that I had a lot of thoughts about, that this wrap-up would get really long, and my wrap-ups this year would get really long. So I decided going forward that I am going to do my wrap-ups in 2-part, a beginning of the month and an end of the month. However, since I decided at the end of the month that I'm going to do this, the wrap-up part 1 is going to go at the end of the month, and then a little bit later in February, I'm gonna have part 2, the rest of the books that I read in January. I have read the gamut in this month, and I am really excited about these wrap-ups and getting into talk about these books because it's what I really love. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.